now I'm joined here in Davos by Sun Christianson, who is the co-CEO Asia Pacific and CEO of China for Morgan Stanley. Welcome, Sun.
Thank you.
To our program. Let me ask you about China-U.S. relations, because last year Chinese President Xi Jinping was here in Davos, delivered a great speech, and this year we are expecting Donald Trump from the United States coming. Of course, this year we'll also have a very strong Chinese delegation as well. What do you make of the current stage, China-U.S. relations, impact on business particularly?
Okay. China and the United States are key partners, and especially in trading, relying on each other for goods and services. So therefore, in the longer run, I really do not expect that the relationship will be too bumpy. It's rather stable. However, that doesn't mean there are no specific issues on trade. Despite of that, we do not expect a very aggressive protectionist policies coming from Washington that will lead to a trade war.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, your prediction probably is very different from the rhetoric that we have been often hearing.
That's right. Well, that side said, it doesn't mean that there is no friction, right? So therefore, for instance, the China-U.S. trade surplus has gone up about 10%, which was the largest ever. That will actually enhance Trump's case for trade actions against China. And in addition, I'm sure you heard yesterday, Washington said they're going to raise trade barriers for solar panels as well as washing machines on all imports. So these are the things that we have to get used to. I think despite these kind of trade actions that Trump might take, in terms of impact on export growth and the GDP on China, that we can say really depends on what kind of sanctions.
Right.
If it's focused on upstream, such as raw materials, steel, alumni, etc., that actually is not going to be too bad because China has moving up the value chain.
You said we have to get used to it, but my question is, why do we have to get used to it? We don't have to get used to it because there are rules internationally speaking when it comes to trade. There are certain things that the bilateral relationship has to respect and focus on in order to have a healthy relationship. Why do we have to bear with it?
Because there are national interests, and Trump, when he was elected to be the president, he said specifically America first. Whether China was the problem, that's subject to the debate. But the reality is, the most important thing is that we got to recognize that China and the United States are more cooperators than competitors. For example, out of this trade surplus, which is quite high last year, 53% include all the high-tech products. A lot of them were produced by American companies based in China. So I think this is a fact that people need to get to know.
That's also true, that people need to get to know from the other end, which is the United States. Do you think that message is really getting across, or people are blindfolded by the internal politics in a way that they are refusing to hear anything else that is different from their original belief?
I think the communication...
Is there still hope in any way?
I think so. I think so. Because I think at the end of the day, these two economies are very much interdependent. And also, most importantly, as you mentioned, I think President Xi Jinping last year was here and delivered this very memorable speech. I think China is going to focus on enhancing its global profile, and also it's going to further its international integration. That's the objective. Then question is how China is going to react to these kind of trade sanctions or actions. I think one can safely assume, in my view, that China is going to be diplomatic, China is going to be incremental and rational. And I think that will be consistent with China's position.
But in a way, that put businesses in an awkward situation, isn't it? When the bilateral relations are experiencing some ups and downs, as you may know very well through the decade. So what does it mean to business community? What are you going to focus on, particularly in your communication with the leadership on both sides?
I think in terms of business opportunities and the risks, actually, you're absolutely right. This is the #1 risk. The trade environment, which is very uncertain.
Exactly.
And secondly, as you know, China is very much focused on deleveraging because of the financial asset bubble. And I think how well that will pan out is another risk. A third thing is that we're dealing with a very rapidly aging population. And although government is very focused on it, still, whether there will be sufficient policy coming out at the right time to really address all these potential issues is something we need to be mindful.
What should China focus on? Is it the so-called international environment, or is it more internal issues that China really have to figure out in order to move to the next stage a big way? What do you think?
I think China is walking with two legs. China is both...
With the same strength?
I think with a lot of focus on both, and so far so good. I think domestically, China actually is in good position because in terms of opportunities are founded, right? We're talking about, Morgan Stanley Research has released recently this research report saying China is a transition from middle income to high income household country. And just to put that in perspective, for the past 30 years, only two countries have made that progress. One is South Korea, the other is Poland. So I think China can do that by 2025. That's brilliant. In addition, with the disposable household income on the rise, and also with the aging population, I think it's going to actually drive the focus and the development of the consumer sector as well as the service sector.
Right. Here's the thing, Wei. I mean, we know in China there's a rocketing high consumer market. People just want to get part of it, right?
Sure.
But on the other hand, how the international system, when it comes to politics, companies, businesses, societies, to adjust to this change about the Chinese consumer market and appeal to it is another question. People want to have this pie, but are you going to make great efforts in order to make that happen? That's another question, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there is one very convenient tool, and that is capital market. The capital market in China is actually second largest in the world. It has already reached 8.7 trillion. But it's a very young market. It's only 27 years old, comparing with the U.S. or London, 200 years old. So therefore, there are a lot of things that needs to be done. And they made a huge progress, but one of the things that we're so pleased to see is actually the market is slowly opening up. And in particular, recently, there is stock connect programs between Hong Kong, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Shenzhen. By the way, we're very actively involved in that. We're the #1 participator in that. And also the market opening up to security firms like us, right? The 51% announcement recently post-Trump's visit was very...
Explain to our viewers, maybe some of them are not necessarily in the field, the 51%.
Yes, for foreign companies operating in China, before the barrier for the ownership, ultimate ownership, was 49. So now that is going to be changing to 51, and also in 3 years, that there will be possibility for 100% ownership. That's in the announcement. Right now, we're waiting for the implementation rules to coming out. And Morgan Stanley, as you know, 95, we set up CICC. 2010, we had our own joint venture in Shanghai called Morgan Stanley Huaxin Securities, doing extremely well. We have a great partner. We're very fortunate. So we're ready to move to 51%. All we're waiting is the policy that gives us more guidance.
Here is the hope. But there's also the issue of speed, efficiency, relationship. When you operate in a big market like that, you know that very well, Wei, through your years in the work. So how do you see, what is the sensors you have about China and about U.S.-China that is telling you right now? What about that speed? What about the efficiency? What about that relationship? Where is it going? How are you going to map out right now to prepare for that?
I think China is actually attracting the world attention as they have been, but more than ever is doing so because there is a vacuum of lack of global leadership. And then I think with the Belt and Road Initiative that China is doing, it's really creates a new dimension in terms of global expansion and also creating connectivity among all different countries. And a lot of people say, hey, this is a China gaining influence, and China trying to grab for soft power. But the reality is, China is doing it for many reasons. Partly is its aspiration to in the global space, lead the globalization, and then also a lot of people didn't know this is two-pronged initiative. It's not about going out; it's also about coming in. So that's why we have talked about various kind of steps. China is gradually opening up, which is great for China, great for the world.